What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the PT Coffee Cast, brought to you by The Movement. My name is Dalton, and alongside me today is my beautifully bearded friend, William. William, how are we doing today?
I'm doing good. I'm on coffee number 3. It's a beautiful day out, and overall, I'm ready to go. How about you?
I'm good, man. It's fall-like weather. I think we're getting there. Like, we're in September where it can be hit or miss, but I'm ready to get a little fall weather.
We're gonna have to soon bust out the PSLs.
Ooh, are you a PSL guy?
No,
Have you ever had one?
I refuse.
So you've never had one?
I don't think so.
I'm trying to think if I've ever had one, and I can't recall like ordering one. But I would bet you, the type of person that I am, that if I had one, I would become the biggest PSL hype boy ever.
Well, maybe we should do an episode where we both have them.
We definitely have to do that.
Give our verdict. Let's do it.
We definitely have to do that. But yeah, before we get into this episode, guys, if you are joining us, thank you so much. If you're not subscribed to the podcast, make sure you head over to your podcast platform and subscribe so you don't miss out on any of our new episodes. If you guys are interested in joining our mentorship, we currently have our cohort number 2 open. We're taking applications. We're still looking to get people in there. A big part of the mentorship success is getting the right people in the mentorship, and so we're really making sure that is happening. So if you guys are interested, you've thought it's something you want to do, you can sign up to do a call and fill out our application. So you can do that in the show notes or through our Instagram bio. We'd really love to hear from you on that. And then if you aren't subscribed to our YouTube channel, make sure you head over there, subscribe so you can see our beautiful faces instead of just listening to our beautiful voices.
Nice one.
You ready to get into this episode? I'm excited about this one.
Yeah, this is going to be a bit of a throwback.
Yeah. So we're going to dive into our story, the story of the PT Coffee Cast. And the movement, I guess, combined. They're one in the same in some realms. Since launching this mentorship, we've had a lot of new people coming to the podcast. We've had people finding our content more based off of some of the mentorship stuff that we're doing. And a big part of what the mentorship is today is the PT Coffee Cast and where it started. So what we want to do today is kind of take you through the full story of and reminisce maybe a little bit of the PT Coffee Cast, how it started, what it originally was for Will and I, and then how it's evolved over the years into what it is now. And what it is now is something that we are really passionate about and think that it's going to be in this form for a really, really long time. So that is the purpose of today's episode. I guess, where should we start?
I guess right at the beginning, where we met, where it all started.
Yeah.
Which was school.
Yeah. So
right?
if you guys don't know, Will and I went to physio school together at Western University in London, Ontario. That's where we first locked eyes with each other. Immediately, I was mesmerized by his beard, and basically, you know what's funny about this? Side note. Is that yesterday, I don't know if you saw this, but on Facebook, it's been 7 years since you and I have been friends as of yesterday.
Wow.
Yeah.
Closing in on that decade.
Yeah. Pretty crazy.
Let's
right?
go.
So that's kind of when it started, was back in our first year of physio school. And I guess the podcast really evolved out of wanting to learn more. And what I always like to say is we wanted to bridge the gap between what we were learning in school and what was going on in clinical practice in that moment. And a big driver was that we started the movement Instagram page at that time, and we were making connections with other clinicians and people online, and we were starting to learn more about a different approach to rehab. And that is what really kind of drove us to be like, hey, why don't we start a podcast where we interview people about what's going on in practice right now, selfishly so that we can learn more, but also because we really enjoyed the idea of like sitting down and having these conversations ourselves, you and I. So bringing in someone else into that was way smarter and way more informed than us was great.
And it kind of like started where Dalton would just come over, and he was like a bit of a newbie in the coffee world, but knew that he was like going to be into it. And so I, at that time, had an AeroPress with like, I would grind my beans fresh. I would brew them in the AeroPress, and I might have shown Dalton this method. And he had a first sip, and it was like love at first sight.
Yeah.
And then that kind of ended up fueling all of our conversations, because what was kind of happening was we were in school and we sort of saw the writing in the wall that school wasn't really intended or set up to really help us thrive as physios. It was more to help us pass the exam. And so we kind of said, okay, well, we actually want to be good at our job. So we were seeing a lot of stuff out there, just kind of talking about what practice is really like and how to actually be a good therapist. And so we would just have coffee fueled conversations about those things, and we would get sometimes into some pretty intense kind of debates about things, and sort of just go back and forth. And then around that same time, like a lot of the medium through which we were learning things was podcasts, and we were like, should we just do one?
Yeah.
And so that's kind of where the like merging of the podcast and the coffee sort of came into play.
Which came the name, the PTCOFFEECAST, which a big shout out to Jimmy McKay, who's the podcast founder, the host of the PT Pintcast. It was like very much like a play off what he was doing with beer and our love for coffee. And I always like to give him a shout out because he was actually super helpful to kind of speaking a little bit to us early on. And he was really the one guy that I think at the time was really doing podcasts in the physio space. There wasn't a lot of physio podcasts going on at that time either, which was another thing that we thought was like kind of cool to maybe jump in the space and do it. And yeah, we were both consuming a ton of podcasts at the time and loved the medium, and it was good timing, and we jumped in and we had a ton of fun doing it. And I think like looking back on it, very grateful for the people that came on our podcast early on and like just wanted to help us and give us their insights. Like you can go back and listen to all the original podcasts, they're all still there, but people like Emma and people like Zach Abor and Nick Hanna and the guys from the Foot Collective, and then we had some pretty cool opportunities to talk to, people like Adam Meekins and Greg Lehman and Todd Hargrove and like tons of people that were really influential in the space for us as young clinicians coming out of school and trying to seek a better way of approaching care in a way that was actually having great impact on people currently in practice. Whereas in school, as well said, we're learning things, but they're more being taught to us to pass an exam that is a bit outdated and maybe not actually as reflective of what was going on in practice. And that was like super huge for our growth as clinicians, and just like really kickstarted what the PTCOFFEECAST became and now is what it is.
Yeah, and that, like you said, that was a huge period of time and so much value. And I just remember us like, it didn't really matter when, where, or how we were recording those episodes, but we somehow made it happen and must have recorded like 100 episodes in school or something like that.
Yeah,
like,
for sure.
Or at least close,
Yeah.
Which is kind of crazy when you think about it. But I think we were just hungry to get out there and test ourselves and learn and catch our identity, I think, in this world. And then we obviously graduated, and it's grown, it's changed to what it is now. But I think without that start, there isn't really now.
Oh yeah, for sure. And before we get into kind of what happened, like once we graduated and tried to figure out what we wanted to become after that, I'd be curious to hear, like, what is like one of your favorite kind of moments from the early days of the podcast? Like, is there something in your mind that really stands out to you?
Oh, I'd have to really think about that, I think. But I mean, there were so many. Like, I remember doing podcasts where I would have to put my budgie in my room because he would be chirping and stuff. And we're talking, meanwhile, we're talking with like Adam Meekins, who's like in the UK on a time difference. And, as someone like, it was kind of like, we wanted to do it well. And I'm like, trying to put my bird, and he's like, is that a bird in the background? Like, just stuff like, there were so many things.
Yeah.
Is there anything that stands out to you?
There's just moments that I was like, man, this is pretty cool. Like, there's a couple of things. Like, one, we back in, like, I don't remember when this was, what year it was, but we went and did those physio night out things with Cash, who would host them, which was super cool. It would like be put on in Toronto, and like you'd have some guest speakers. And the one time, it was like the coolest like amalgamation of like the podcast in my mind of why we wanted to do it. It was like Nick Hanna was presenting, Zach and Steph were both there, I'm pretty sure, to also present. And then we were there with our coffee, which we did have the OG blend for those PTCOFFEECAST listeners that remember that. We had our own coffee that we were selling as part of the brand, and we were there with the coffee. And it was just one of those moments where I was like, oh man, this is like really cool. Like, these are people that we connected with through the podcast and the internet, and now we're all in one place, and like we get to be here to represent like our podcast and be part of this cool night. Like, that was something that really stands out to me as one of my favorite things that came out of, the podcast itself.
That's awesome. I mean, I remember just the first episode that we did, and we had this coffee treble cock. And I remember sitting there and we're like, we have no idea, what we're doing with this podcast. We're just going to do it. And we kind of set everything up, and we had this treble cock coffee. And what was funny about that is like a little bit of like an Easter egg is like the tasting notes on the coffee said, like, it was like normal stuff like chocolate, nutty, and then it was special. And we were like, what does that mean?
Yeah.
What's the special mean? But that's a pretty iconic moment that I think of it.
Yeah.
And even like the Jimmy McKay thing with the PT Pintcast, I still remember I was sleeping and you were in business class and I was planning on not going. Sorry, Daryl. And I get a text from you and you're like, hey, the guy from the PT Pintcast is going to be in class. And so I wake up and like sprint to the bus stop and made it just in time to see that podcast, which I'm thankful that I did.
Yeah.
But just thinking about moments like that is just kind of shows how much has happened to sort of lead up to where we are now.
Yeah, and I think once we kind of transition to the next phase, like, after we got out of physio school or graduated physio school, we were really, a lot changed. Like, you and I were no longer with each other every day like we were. I stayed in London, you moved back home to Burlington, and we always knew the movement, the page, and the podcast we wanted to continue to do, and we wanted to become something. We just didn't really know exactly, what it was going to be. And, the movement evolved into like, obviously what we do now as like our clinic and our physical business. And, we were still doing the podcast. We were still interviewing people remotely, and we tried to continue to bring on guests that was still fulfilling on that mission of like bridging the gap between what we were learning and what we weren't learning in school and what was actually going on in clinical practice. And I think it was, again, very helpful. It started transitioning from us to being students to us being new grads, and we were now interviewing, asking questions from a new grad standpoint. But I think you and I were both starting to realize that we were going to have to maybe evolve it or change it into something else. And I think that is that is what the podcast has become now. And I would say a big part of that was the transition of us opening our own clinic and now having to hire and bring on physiotherapists to be on our team and to treat with a philosophy that we, believe in, and, have these skill sets that we would want a clinician to have. And our job is to mentor these people to come into a position on our team and really thrive. And I think that's kind of what led to more of what the podcast and now what we've developed with the mentorship is.
That, and like just by nature of having to start and run a business like a clinic, we realized that by having to look big picture, we realized all these little areas that can really influence your practice, like the client experience, the like marketing, sales stuff that we never really thought about before. But because we were running a business, we started realizing how important those things were to actually being a confident, successful physio or clinician generally, combined with teaching our staff that we were bringing on, or imagining like how are we going to onboard them well and give them a skill set to really thrive at the movement. And then I think we also like thought about what we experienced when we were new grads, and that really influenced what we decided to do with the podcast.
Yeah, for sure. And I think a big part of what we realized as new grads is the fact that, like, you get out of school and you have all this knowledge, but how to deliver that knowledge effectively within a clinical practice is very challenging. And we found that we were being very much pushed in a direction of like continuing to add more knowledge to our quote unquote toolbox so that we could continue to fill the gap of like being new in the space and not being necessarily confident. And we started to realize like that wasn't necessarily the answer. And I think you and I both took a little bit of a different approach to how we navigated our careers as new grads. Like, we didn't run out and take a bunch of different courses right away. And we really sought out, clinics and people to work for that were going to help us learn more about how to be a clinician, like by just working with people. And maybe we didn't take the highest paying job, or I worked part-time as a strength coach and part-time as a physio because I wanted to learn certain skills. And we really took the time to figure out what we wanted to accomplish as clinicians for ourselves and for our career, which really helped us then take the steps as to like, okay, now I might want to take this course and that course and add this to my realm of knowledge to be able to pursue a career path that really fires me up.
Yeah, basically the crux of the problem we were seeing was clinicians get out of school, they've just taken 7 years of schooling, sometimes more, and they get out and immediately go, oh, I need to learn more. And it's like, learn more clinical knowledge. And it's like, you just did for 7 years. You have a lot of clinical knowledge. Yes, you can build more on that over time, but there shouldn't be this rush of going out there and trying to like take course after course after course where you're just adding more clinical knowledge when you actually need, now you're in the service industry and like you have to communicate that knowledge. You have to be confident in what you do know so that you can portray that to people and instill confidence in them. And you have to take them through a whole client life cycle. You have to sell them on more sessions that they need because their insurance is running out and they want to stop, but they're not ready to stop. Like, there are all these things that really you need to work on and think about at the beginning of your career so that you have a solid foundation, and then you can layer on knowledge in a way that's more appropriate for where you're at.
Yeah, and I think, we are now at a perfect time where in our careers where we're at the point where the shift in the podcast and adding the mentorship makes a lot of sense. I think before we knew it was going to be something different, we didn't know. And we kind of tried different things to see what it would be. And now we're at that point in our career where, we're 5 years into being physios. So we have quite a bit of experience. We've learned from a ton of people. We've implemented different approaches and frameworks, and we've had success, and we've also had a lot of failures, and we've learned from those. And I think we're now at a point where, we have enough experience to now offer that to people who are in our position now as new grads and maybe students who are just getting out of or transitioning to get out of school, to where what we have to offer is very much applicable, but also has more merit because we've been going through the process for so long now. And, that's by no means that we know it all, and we are constantly always evolving. And I think a big part of what has led us to the mentorship and some of the information we go through now is like being mentored by other people in both like the business space as well as the clinical space, that has now allowed for us to take a lot of those things and merge and make them very relevant to like us when we were new grads. And now that's what we're trying to do with the podcast.
So a little bit of a different focus, but the spirit is the exact same. If you're in this crew, you drink coffee, and really I think you just want to learn. You're humble. You know that there's a lot to still learn. And then you're pursuing a meaningful career. I think is like something that we've always stuck to, is like, hey, like we believe physio and being a clinician can have a lot of impact. How can we do it better?
Yeah. And that's kind of what led, us to the mentorship that we run now, which what we're trying to do with that is like, you can kind of see in the podcast, in the mentorship itself, those things are the same thing. The podcast is the mentorship is part of the podcast. We look at the podcast as a way for us to mentor you guys totally for free. Like, we're going to always put out this podcast for probably as long as Will and I are still doing this thing in the rehab space. I don't know how long that's going to be, but as long as we're here, we're going to do it, and we're going to try to add as much value as we can with these episodes for you guys. And then what we realized is that we can take that information and we can make it more nuanced, and we can create an environment that is a lot more driven to educate you on the frameworks and the principles, and provide you with opportunities to ask questions and make it relevant to you specifically. And that's what the mentorship is, and evolve to. So it's just like another level of the content that we put out on the podcast. And we're so happy with how the content for the mentorship has turned out, and what we get to put out to you guys on this podcast on a weekly basis. And that's always going to evolve and grow as we evolve and grow, and as the space evolves and grows. So I think when it comes to like, what is the PT COFFEECAST and what is the movement mentorship, like these things are going to be the same for a long time now. I think we found what we wanted the podcast to eventually become, and we're super stoked about finding that. And now it's like, okay, how can we continue to elevate and provide you guys, the listeners, with the best possible content that we can? And we're going to keep doing that for as long as I can rant about physio and rehab over a cup of coffee.
Yeah, who knows? Maybe we'll hit episode number 1,000 eventually.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you want to add to that?
I don't think so. I think that about covers it. I think, the thing, it's crazy to think how far it's come, and it's so awesome to actually have taken some people through the movement mentorship. Like, it's been really incredible to see people going through a bit of a transformation, like a similar one that we made. And I'm fired up for anyone else that wants to join.
Yeah, and if you're new to the podcast, or you've been new to the podcast in the last year, Go back and listen to some of those old episodes. Like, it's funny because I'll go through them and I'm like, damn, like there's some good stuff here. Like, there's some really good interviews that we had. And if you want to hear us early on in the podcast days too, like, it's super easy to like sort your podcast by like the newest or oldest podcast. I encourage you to go back and like listen to a couple of those episodes. One, so you can laugh at, Will and I try to be podcast hosts, but also so you can get some really good value from some awesome clinicians and some awesome people. So I encourage you to check that out. But that's all we got for today, guys. If you aren't subscribed to the podcast, make sure you do so on your podcast platform. If you want to join the movement mentorship like Will had talked about, you can fill out our application form. The link is in our bio on Instagram or in the show notes. And then if you aren't subscribed to the YouTube channel, we put out our video episodes there. So you can head over there, subscribe to us on the YouTube channel. But yeah, that is it. As always, guys, make sure you stay caffeinated. Peace.